This was a very popular lens that might spark nostalgia to some photographers that used it. The old Canon EF 50mm f1.8 Mark II. This is a lens review. We will start with physical aspects, and at the ending of this clip, we will do 5 image quality tests. Let's start with the first thing. Build quality. There is no 50mm lens that doesn't look attractive. This one is no exception. But as soon as you hold it in your hand, you feel the plastic. Excluding the lenses inside that are made from glass, it's entirely covered in plastic. So it brings a cheap feeling. To use the focusing ring, we must first use the switch and set the lens on manual focusing. Otherwise, we might damage the autofocusing motor. The ring doesn't turn very smoothly, and it doesn't feel like it was built for precision. This lens was replaced by Canon's EF 50mm f1.8 STM that has a much better build quality. But more on that in another video. Let's see the size and weight. For some time, this was Canon's smallest lens, until the 40mm pancake lens was released. It's just 4.1 centimeters long, and it has 130 grams. So it's small and very light. Let's now talk about the focal length. 50mm on a full-frame camera means that this lens is not wide nor a telephoto lens. It's right in the middle. It gives a standard natural perspective. So, on a full-frame camera, this lens is an excellent choice for portraits, street photography, or landscape shots. If you ask me if there was only one prime lens that I could pick to use in most situations, it would be the 50mm one. If we mount this lens on an APS-C sensor camera, 50mm will become 80mm. So it will be quite zoomed in due to the crop factor. Let's see on what cameras it will work. In the full name of this lens, we don't see EF-S, we only see EF, which means that the lens will work on both crop sensor and full frame cameras. Let's see the aperture now. What surprised me at this lens was the small number of aperture blades, only 5, and they are not rounded. We will see later how the bokeh looks like. The lens can close its aperture at a maximum value of f22. Let's now move to focusing. As we will see, this lens focuses slowly while recording video. I tested it on a Canon M50. The camera was recording in Full HD, where we have Canon's dual pixel AF. Even with a smart focusing sensor, the lens doesn't focus fast in video. We can also hear some noises. They are not too loud, but enough to be annoying. When the camera isn't recording video, the lens focuses fast. It does have a tendency to focus hunt, and again, it makes some noises. Still, for my street photography, while I was out with my Canon 5D Mark III, the focusing didn't cause any problems. It doesn't have manual focus override, and it doesn't have image stabilization. But before judging this lens too much, I have to say this. It was announced back in 1990. This lens was released more than 30 years ago. So let's go ahead and test the image quality of this lens. Let's see the sharpness. On a full-frame camera at f1.8, sharpness in the middle of the image is quite good. Contrast is a bit weak, but if we stop down to f2.8, it gets a lot better. Let's switch again to f1.8 and see the corner. Besides that ghosting effect and low contrast, corner sharpness is not that bad. If we stop down to f2.8, there is a big improvement in sharpness and contrast. If we stop down again to f4, we have a very good result, and at f5.6, everything is looking excellent. This nice sharpness is maintained all the way to f13. Only starting with f16, the effect of diffraction begins to soften this image. At f22, of course, we get more softness. Let's now see the performance of this lens on a crop sensor camera. In the middle of the image, at f1.8, contrast levels are pretty low, but sharpness is looking decent. A thing that appeared on those contrasting edges is magenta color fringing. If we stop down to f2.8, everything is looking much better. In the corner, at f1.8, again, we have decent sharpness, but with ghosting and low contrast. stopping down to f2.8 for an improvement. At f4 we have a good result, and again an excellent result at f5.6. There is still good sharpness all the way to f13, and at f16 diffraction starts to soften this image. More softness at f22. So this lens delivers good results when it comes to sharpness. Let's see distortion and vignetting. There are no big issues on a crop sensor camera, so I'm testing this lens only on full frame, where we see a small amount of barrel distortion. At f1.8 those corners are dreadfully dark, but an improvement comes quickly if we stop down to f2.8. For a good result, we can close the aperture again at f4. Moving to bright light performance. This lens doesn't have a good result here. We have heavy flaring and a loss of contrast when the bright light is hitting the glass. Close-up image quality. Let's keep our eye on the number 6 and see how this lens performs. At f1.8 we don't see too much sharpness and contrast. There is an improvement at f2.8, but contrast levels are still a bit low. If we stop down at f4, everything is looking good, and no big change at f5.6. So, not great, but a decent result in close-ups. Finally, bokeh. The backgrounds have a slight harshness in them, but they don't look bad. The images are perfectly usable. If the lens had a minimum focusing distance lower than 45 centimeters, it would have been useful. In conclusion, this lens has some optical flaws, and it also has a cheap build quality, but it's good when it comes to sharpness. Even if it was released more than 30 years ago, I believe that this lens can still be used today. For example, a beginner can learn a lot of great things from this prime lens, and I saw a lot of great photos made with it. If this video was useful, please press that like button and see you on the next one.